G'day everyone, it's Bo from GrowthWise. Recently we were discussing AI tools and how everyone that is hearing about them or talking about them, we're really at different stages of the journey in terms of the use of those tools. So we thought we'd put together a quick presentation, and then after the presentation we're going to run through some demonstrations as well for anyone that's curious and you're at the beginner phase. So one of the first things that I think everyone kind of gets caught up on is which tool you may be able to use. And there's so many different ones that are available now. So for example, Gemini, Claude, Grok, Copilot, the ones that you can see on the screen are all different options. But before you actually get into using any particular tool, there's some things that you should think about. So one of them is responsible data use. And then also as well, just what are you actually going to use it for? If you're not using it for work, for example, you're just going to use it as like a personal tool where the data that you input and output is not something that you have to be super worried about, then you can probably use freely available, ChatGPT options or some of the lower tiered paid options as well, and be relatively okay with it. But once you move into actually having to use it for work, you need to think about a few more things. One of them is how long is your data retained? So a lot of them will actually have these clauses that say, they can actually retain data for X amount of period. They may also have things about data training. So depending on the data that you've input, what they can then do with that data for training their future models. Also as well though, think about how many people in your team actually need to use this. And then if you're going to have your team using it, what are the different sort of controls that you need to have in place and the policies that you need to have in place to make sure that they're used responsibly as well. I also like to touch on when I'm talking to anyone about this that do not think that a paid account means a safe account. So if you actually want to really get into using these within your workplace, you need to go and read the terms and conditions. Just because you've paid for an account does not mean that they're going to treat all of your data equally. It's kind of a wild west when you actually start reading some of the different terms and things that are available. So make sure you do your own research and just double check what actually happens in those instances depending on what you've signed up to. Lastly though as well, think about if you've already got a tool in play that you otherwise may not have even known about. So for example, we use Google Workspace at GrowthWise. Google Workspace actually has Gemini as part of what we already paid for per user. So we've already got a tool that's available. So in that case, it just becomes, okay, let's go and make sure that all of the responsible data use and everything is in play. But we've already got a tool, so we don't necessarily need to sign up to a new one. In that case, we do use other ones at GrowthWise. But if we were brand new to it, for example, if you're brand new to it, go and look to see if you may already have an AI tool as part of your business suites that you're already paying for before you go and jump the gauntlet and then go and sign up to multiple other ones. So moving on from the responsible use and responsible signups and picking a tool, let's talk a little bit about what they can do. So again, we're approaching this from a beginner's perspective. The first one that I have on this page is actually using it for research. So if you think, you wanted it to look into a particular topic, you would normally go to Google, you'd type a Google search in, and then you would look at all the pages, you'd go into each relevant page, or you might go to YouTube or whatever you normally do to try and research something. With an AI tool now, you can basically do a similar type of query and it will get you a lot of different responses that you can then filter down on to basically do like a Google search, but a lot quicker with a lot more robust and rich data. The second example that I have is interpreting an uploaded document. So say, for example, you were given a lease and you wanted to find within that lease a particular clause because in previous leases that's always been there. You can actually upload that document and say to an AI tool, can you find this particular clause and let me know about the page number as well. The third one that I have is recreating documentation. So say, for example, you might have a price book that a supplier gives you, but you want to put your own logo on it, that sort of change. Something that might normally take someone a little bit of time to go through and make sure everything's right. You can use an AI tool to do that. Or say, for example, you had standard operating procedures that haven't been updated in a little while, or there's been maybe a legislation change and you need to make sure that you've actually updated and put those particular changes in. That's another good use case for it. So when you're using these tools as well, what we need to consider is what we're actually expecting as an output and what's going to be acceptable. So this is normally referred to as prompting. So prompting, the easiest way to explain prompting is just basically asking a question and expecting an output. Now, for this, I always like to think of it kind of backwards. So rather than just I'm going to ask a question, I think about it in terms of what's an acceptable answer to my question. So for number one, I have what result do you expect? So think about that and then move to number two. What's the data that you have provided and even the text data? So say, for example, if we're using the lease documentation, you would have uploaded the lease and you don't want to be super simple and just say, find a clause about X. You want to say, find the particular clause about if the building was inaccessible, what happens? So expand out what you're actually asking in a prompt and you'll get a much better output. So number three kind of relates to number two and what I was just talking about is how much instruction have you given? Because if you don't give enough instruction, you're going to get a poor output. So just think good input equals good output. And the more information that you normally give up front, the better output that you're going to get. We've kind of touched on this part a little bit already, but we do need to talk about it a little bit more, which is what are the AI tools good at and what are they bad at? Now, remember, not all tools are created equally, and as time goes on, a lot of them are getting better and better at different things. But again, thinking from a beginner's perspective, we need to think about, okay, if we're just going to be prompting, so just interacting with chat windows, what things are going to work well and what things are not going to work well. So some things that they're good at, so idea expansion. So you've got a new idea, you've been talking with your mates about it, and you just think, okay, I'm not really getting as challenged as I wanted on that. You might be able to use an AI tool to go back and forth with to get some additional ideas or get really, really challenged about what that idea may be. Some of the other things that we have on here, researching topics we've already went through, interpreting text in documents like the lease example. Anything to do with language, they're normally quite good at. But then if we move on to what's bad, what you'll notice when you're using them is repeatable results are actually quite hard. So what you may prompt one day, you can redo the same prompt the next day and the output will not be the same. Same with mathematics as well. They are getting better and better at this as time goes on, but you do need to check the output that you actually get from these tools to make sure that whatever you've asked for is actually right. And same thing with being factual. So I gave the example earlier of the lease and saying, okay, find this particular clause and then also give me the page number. So the reason why you ask for the page number is then that's a verifiable thing that you can go look up yourself and just be happy that you sure I did find it, but now I can go to say page 64 of that lease and read the exact clause as I want to read it. So now that we know just a little bit more about the AI tools, let's talk about some of the terminology. So one of the things that you'll see referenced quite often is models. So the easiest way to think of a model is basically just a different brain. So there's different models from each different provider. Google's got their own, OpenAI has their own, Anthropic has their own. Each one is better or worse at different tasks because of the way that they've been trained. So depending on what task you have at hand, you can actually change and pick different models to try and see what kind of different outputs you get. And you may find that there's certain models that you're like, you know what, I like that better because of the way that it actually interacts or the way that it responds. So just find models that you think work well with the task at hand. Now, as you move further down and start to get more advanced with models, the other thing to be considerate of is different models cost different amounts of money for what they actually output. So when you've got a monthly paid account, normally you don't have to think too much about this, but you'll probably see, if you have done any research in this, you'll notice that sometimes you'll see people that say, oh, I ran out of usage. So running out of usage normally means that part of your paid account, you have a particular amount of usage that you have per model. And then if you've exceeded that usage, then you have to move on to a different model to continue using your tool. So it just means that you've kind of got like this limited brain capacity. And once that brain's fully utilized at a certain point, you've then got to select a new brain, I guess is probably one of the most simplest ways of explaining that. Moving on from models, let's talk about tokens. So a token is something you'll probably read about if you've read anything to do with AI. With tokens, you'll see this concept of input tokens, cached tokens, and output tokens. Before we even talk about any of that, let's just talk about a token is just a representation of a word. So you might have one word might be the equivalent of one token, or a longer word might be considered, 3/4 of a token. So they use this as basically a measure of how much kind of processing power or how much cost is actually needed to interpret and then generate a result. So an input token is based on what you give the model. So when you're actually doing your prompt and you're asking for a result, they're all considered input tokens based on the words or the data that you've given. Cached tokens is anything that it's already outputted that it can actually then refer to. It's already done the work, it's already generated it, it's already in memory, so that's why they refer to it as a cached token. An output token is the initial generation. So when you've done your prompt and you ask a question and then you get that output that says whatever you're expecting as the output, that's what's considered your output tokens. Now, it's something you probably won't have to worry about too much, but if you do move down the track and you then have to think about, say, a model where you have to pay each time you use it, understanding token cost becomes pretty important, obviously, because instead of having a monthly account where you just pay a fee, you get your usage and you kind of move on. If you're moving into a model where you've got to pay for each interaction, understanding the cost of each token is very important. Now that we know a little bit more about AI and just some of the terminology, now let's take a look at a couple of examples. So after this slide, I'll actually jump into a couple of the different tools and we'll run through each one. So presentation, what I'm talking about there is what I spoke about earlier with things like price books. We'll run through an example of that. Research, again, that's what I was talking about with kind of, using it to research a particular idea or a topic. And then ideas, what I'm going to show you with that is how you can actually use a prompt to make the AI challenge you. So rather than your agreeable mates that tell you that everything's great, you can actually make it tell you what's not great about an idea just by giving it a particular prompt. So let's get stuck into that now. Okay, let's get started with some examples. So you should be able to see my screen and you should be able to see how silly this is. So I've given it a prompt that says fuel prices in Australia are crazy right now. It seems like the best thing I should do is buy a horse. There is no fuel cost and I could park it anywhere. So notice how in that prompt, I've given it nothing negative. I haven't said to it, hey, analyze this idea. Is it a good idea? Is it a bad idea? I've just said, this all seems good. And the response is pretty much good as well. So what we're going to do is redo this same prompt, but we're going to ask it for a few extra things. Okay, so let's click the new chat button. We're going to copy in the same prompt and we're going to say, tell me if this is a good idea or not. I don't live on a farm. I don't know much about horses. Let's see the different response that we're going to get here. Notice how we've got a completely different, completely changed response just by adding a few little extra bits of detail. I didn't actually expect this example to be as ridiculous as what it was, but it's kind of a really good point. When you're actually doing the prompts, make sure that you put a little bit of context and detail around them because sometimes these things can go just off the charts and really give you some bad sort of outputs. So now we've got a much better output that explains things in a greater idea. So when I was talking about this earlier and I said, you might have an idea and all of your mates tell you it's a great idea, if you actually prompt ChatGPT or Claude or something and say, be specific about why this is good or why this is bad, you'll actually get a lot of data back out like this. It can be much more worthwhile in terms of making decisions. Now let's quickly talk about another thing that you can do in pretty much all of the AI tools. So we're going to click down onto wherever my mouse has gone, onto here, and then we're going to go to personalization. And then notice how you've got this thing that says custom instructions. So even in the response that I was given there, it was a bit smarter. It didn't seem as ridiculous, but there was still some kind of snarky and stupid responses. So what I'm going to say in my custom instructions is, I'm very serious. Never make jokes. Be short unless I specify otherwise. So it's very short, this custom instruction. I'm not giving it a lot of information, but it's enough for it to rethink what it's going to say. So let's save that. And it's also a really good example of what I said earlier about you won't always get the same output. Let's copy this now, do a new chat, and now our new custom instruction should be in place. And then let's see what happens. So we'll just wait for it to come through. Notice how now it actually seems to be paying a bit more attention because I've given it this prompt to say, okay, be short. So now that's the entire response. It looks a lot more serious. There's no jokes or anything in it. It just seems to be a very straight up factual output. So if you are going to use these as well, take some time to do that custom instruction because it will make it, better suited to the way that you expect to see things. All right, let's move on to another example. I think I made my point pretty clear so far about prompting with the examples that we got earlier. One of the other things I spoke about was research. So when we're doing research, what I would like to do is rather than set it to instant, I'm going to set it to pro. And for this, I had an example recently where I was talking with a friend about audio latency. It was a bit of a weird thing to be talking about, but I was trying to then find a specific video that was related to a game developer that spoke about this topic. So what I would ask is basically try and find that video, and you'll see it actually go out and try and find references and things to it. So if I say, can you find the video of John Carmack talking about audio latency with the, I think it was a Meta Quest 3 or Meta VR devices. So I haven't given it a lot of detail, but I've probably given it enough that when it goes out and does the searches and everything, we'll get a lot of output back. So I'll press the search or the send prompt button now, and I'll probably stop the video just because it will take quite a bit of time when you're going through Pro. You can always click on this as well. So if you click on where it says Pro Thinking, you'll actually see it go through different steps as things are working through and as it actually goes out and tries to make sense of what you've asked it. So that can actually be useful sometimes. So now we've actually got some outputs of where it's trying to figure everything out, and I'll just let that go and then we'll come back to it a little bit later. But you can get an idea now, right? So it's actually got what we're looking for. It's found some websites. It's looking for other information. We're still going through, and it's giving us this full output of what it's doing. So from a research perspective, it's really good. Like, we've got a lot of different searches and things that are happening, and I haven't had to go to Google and click through 1,000 links to try and find it. I also haven't had to go into an actual YouTube video and try and find a timestamp at this point either. Okay, we've actually got an output now. So if we jump back into the ChatGPT window, we can see that it thought for 10 minutes. Now, it seems like a long time, but if we actually go over here and we read through everything that it did, so all of the different searches, every different website that it went into, so we're already up to probably 12 plus websites at this point. It's read the content from them. Look at the bottom, look at all the different sources that it's gone and looked into. Like, that's actually quite a lot. Quite a lot going on there. And if we jump back to here, it says found it. It's on YouTube, and the latency section starts about 18 minutes, 15 seconds, continues to about 20 minutes, 30 seconds. So I did open it up and I had a look, and it's exactly right. So that is the part where he was doing a talk where he was explaining about using a VR headset and the problem of latency. So kind of like when you're on a Zoom call and you're talking and you're not sure when someone else has stopped talking. He was talking about trying to solve that problem with a headset. So I was able to find that with that one prompt, as you can see here. So if you've got specific things that you want to research, rather than having to spend a significant amount of time trying to track them down, this can be very, very useful for that. All right, moving on to the last example. On my screen, you'll see that I'd sent Steph the video that you've been watching earlier today to just get it looked over. And the last line there, perhaps your example should then be using a skill that turns this crap presentation into one that is much more on brand. Because when I use the actual PDF for creating the presentation that you watched at the start of this, some of the fonts were incorrect, some of the spacing was off, there were some things that just weren't quite right. So what we're going to do now is jump into Claude Cowork. So I'll just pause the video shortly and we'll get Claude Cowork set up. And then what we'll do is we'll give it that presentation and we'll try and get it to correct some of the issues that you can see that Steph's mentioned here. Okay, we're in a new tool now. So we're in Claude Cowork, which is made by Anthropic. And the way that this works is you need to basically start from a folder. So if I go to work in a project now, this is the one that I want, Cowork example. And what it will do is it'll actually pop this thing up saying, do you want to allow access to the folder? So when we were talking about allowing permissions and everything earlier, this is a really good example of that. It's only going to actually use that one particular folder. So let's click on allow. And so this is the one that we wanted to use. And within that folder, let me just double check that it's actually the right one. Yeah, I've got the AI presentation that was a PowerPoint that we used and the font's wrong. So what I can do is say the presentation in this folder has the wrong font used in some places. It should be, if I could type better, Poppins Ultra Bold all the time. Can you fix it? So notice we've said, okay, you've got a file, it's going to be in this folder, and here's what's wrong with it, and this is what we want corrected. So now I've done that. The model by default will always select, in most circumstances, the most recent model, but in here you can also look at previous models as well, but we'll use the most recent one for this. And click the send button, and you'll actually see Claude Cowork, similar to what we saw in ChatGPT, where it's actually doing different things in the background. And we can just click through and it'll actually explain it. So a lot of this will be very like computer talk for a lot of people. But if you did actually want to look into what it's actually doing, you can click on these buttons and see what's happening. So I'll stop the recording here because, again, it may take a little bit of time to generate. But what we should see is an output after this that has corrected some of those fonts. Let's have a look. Told me what slide it was on, what was wrong. It's also given me a thing saying that in its environment, it couldn't actually inspect the file properly to double check everything, but we can click on view here. Sometimes these will actually render a little bit odd. And one of the other comments that Steph mentioned was this orange bubble that was on all of these different pages. The font to me now looks right. It's probably a little bit weird in the preview that we've got here. But we should be able to do, I also just noticed we've got this extra blank page. So it's done this first fix, so I'll re-prompt it now. So before I hit send on this next prompt, what I've said is I have noticed that there are orange circles on most pages, get rid of them. Also remove the final white slide. So if we scroll down here in the preview, there's a white slide that we don't actually need at all. The last slide should be the one that says examples as the heading. Create a new file once you are done. I want to keep the very first original file as a reference. So I want to actually see what the first one looked like in comparison to what Claude comes up with at the end. So let's send that off and I'll pause the video recording again. Let's have a quick look. Done, apparently. And if we look at the preview, there is no more orange little ball. So it seems to have done everything. So Claude Cowork's quite good at this sort of thing. So if you have price books, that sort of stuff, and you wanted to maybe like replace a supplier logo with your own logo, that sort of thing, this is probably the tool to use for that. And yeah, always ask it to keep original files because then you can do a comparison and go, okay, did it actually change what it was meant to change or has it done something wrong? Sometimes you may need to just look at it and correct a few little things, but it can still be a huge time saver. Well, there you go, everybody. Hopefully this video has been a good introduction to AI if you're not already using it, and hopefully the small little examples have been helpful. If there's anything else you wanted to ask, just jump into Circle and leave a comment on the video.